And hello and welcome to another edition of Cyclones FeverCast, episode number 48. And we have a very special guest on tonight. We're going to do things a little bit differently, but we're going to bring the guest on right away. And my guest this evening is Gershon Rabinowitz. And Gershon's been on the show before, and he covers both teams. He covers the Cyclones and the Staten Island Yankees, and he's been busy running back and forth, but we're lucky enough to get a hold of him tonight. Gershon, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, we couldn't have two more different teams in the New York Penn League than the Cyclones and the Yankees this year. I mean, the Cyclones have gotten off to an awful start, and the Yankees have gotten off to a good start. So, let's talk a little bit about the Cyclones. What the heck is gone wrong this year so far with them?
It feels like everything's gone wrong in some ways, especially the first 2 weeks of the season. Their offense has been non-existent. You're seeing so many fielding errors. They've had games where they've had 5 errors, 6 errors. They haven't really been able to do anything there. The bullpen's been taxed. They have not had any control with their pitching staff. And when you don't pitch, you're not going to win. And I think that's really been what the biggest difference is with them. But they've really been off to a rough start. They showed a couple of flashes. It looked like in the doubleheader on Sunday that maybe they were going to break out of some things, and then they had a rough go of it in that final game against Connecticut. And then on Tuesday in Tri-City, that didn't go very well. So we'll see where they go. But, it's really just been a rough start, and it already seems like things are bleak.
And they changed a lot of the the coaching staff this year with Edgardo Alfonso taking over as manager and Royce Ring coming in as pitching coach. They kept the hitting coach, but I don't know. I've seen some interviews with Fonzie, and he really doesn't seem like he wanted to take the job. It just seems like he was being a good soldier. Have you've probably talked to him? What kind of feeling do you get about him as manager so far?
I mean, that's exactly what he described there. I mean, that's what he said on media day, that he's been asked by the organization to become the manager for the last 3 years or so, and he said that he didn't want to do that type of job. If you remember, he was only coaching some of the home games.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really been a learning curve for this guy, because he's never really managed at any level professionally, and it's a big contrast when you're going from guys like Rich Donnelly and Tom Gamboa, who had tremendous amounts of experience and have seen every type of level of professional baseball. It seems like that they've coached on. For Alfonso, it's really a learning curve. He's trying to figure things out on the fly, and he wants to be able. Really, the focus, it seems like, with the Cyclones is development. I don't know if it's as much wins and losses as it is trying to figure out how to develop professional baseball players, and it just seems like everything he's doing is just learning on the job, and we'll see how things go in this year, but it really just seems like a rookie effort so far.
And you look at this, and you even have to wonder somewhat about the development factors, because he was such a good defensive player, and they're so bad so far defensively, and you have to wonder, is it something in this organization? They don't hit. They don't get big hits. You have to wonder, and is it an organizational problem, or is it just a specific problem with the low minors?
No, we've talked about that so many times. Last year when they had college players in the lineup, they couldn't hit. When they had younger players the year before, they couldn't hit. I'm wondering if it's just the approach or maybe something philosophical. It just seems that way. And also, just not as the approaches, when you get into a 2-strike count, chasing pitches out of the zone, not adjusting to the pitchers in the New York Penn League, how they're going to pitch you, how they're going to attack you. And it just looks bad, but especially defensively. If you're leaving your pitching staff hanging out to dry, their ERAs are going to go up. You're going to stay on the field longer, and you can't prevent runs from scoring. The only pitcher in their starting rotation that I think has an ERA under 3 is Juan Carlos Medina, and he had a terrific start in the errorless game in the second game of that doubleheader on Sunday. But other than that, it's really been an uphill battle for them with their pitching staff and defensively.
And, of course, last year they had trouble, not as bad defensively, I don't think, and hitting again. And yet their pitching was pretty decent last year. Any idea why they decided to change pitching coaches? Was that anything? Did you hear anything about that at all?
I'm not familiar with the reason. I mean, unless they just felt that Royce Ring did a tremendous job last year in the Gulf Coast League, and they just wanted to try to give him an opportunity to have him move along with the organization, maybe with some of the pitchers that he worked with in GCL, and then have them come to New York Penn League. But it was somewhat surprising that Billy Brick, he seemed like he made a good impression that first year and that he was not back for this year. But, I mean, really, I'm just speculating. I really have no idea on that.
Yeah, it is very surprising, though, because he did do a good job, I thought, and he wasn't brought back this year, but they brought back Sean Ratliff, and that was a little confusing because they, like you said, they didn't hit last year, and they continue to not hit. And again, we don't know if it's him or if it's a philosophy in an organization or what, but I don't know. I think it may be a time for the Mets front office to really sit down and consider everything throughout their organization.
They might have to, but one thing that could change with this lineup for the Cyclones is they did not have certain pieces earlier in the year. Obviously, when you come into a New York Penn League season, you don't have guys that have signed out of the draft, not immediately if they're playing in a college World Series or still competing in college, or even guys that are coming off injury. So the biggest difference is now that I've noticed, it seems like they have shown some signs of life in recent games offensively. Matt Winokur and Quinn Brody were both teammates at Stanford. They're in this lineup. It seems like they got good line drive swings, and they have a solid approach. Ricardo Cespedes, who has been on the top 30 prospect list for the Mets, and they expect big things out of him. He's gotten off to a very quick start, and maybe they could do something with that. But the question is, will they be able to have enough pitching that will be able to sustain any offensive output or any improvements that they make there?
Yeah, and that's going to be the big key. And of course, the Mets have always been known for their pitching. So, but it doesn't. Their number one pick is not yet reported. He's due to come in July, I think.
I mean, even when they do have Patterson, one thing you got to. I mean, Peterson. I mean, when you do get him, one thing you have to consider, especially with any college pitcher, that he might be on a pitch count. So you don't even know. Maybe he might pitch only 2 or 3 innings per start, depending on how many innings he pitched in Oregon, and depending on what they decide in the Mets organization with him.
Yeah, a lot like Justin Dunn did last year.
Yeah, but Dunn, I think the difference with Dunn was he was actually a reliever converted into a starter.
Right.
So he didn't have that many innings on him, but I guess they didn't want to stretch him out too much, and they just limited how many innings he threw. But he seemed to pitch pretty well, and we'll see if they'll follow the same philosophy with Peterson.
And, of course, last year they also drafted their number 2 pick was a pitcher, Anthony Kay, who had Tommy John surgery. He was scheduled to go to Brooklyn last year, but never actually showed up, of course, because he had Tommy John surgery. But he should be about a year in about now. Do you hear anything about him at all?
Well, he had Tommy John surgery, I believe it was, September or October last year. So
was
it's usually
that late?
A 12 to 14-month process. Okay. So he probably won't pitch this season. You would probably expect him, I would say, sometime next season, and I would assume short season ball or something of that nature. But, really it's too early to tell, and he's just going to recover from the Tommy John surgery and then go from there.
So he did have it that late. I thought he had it earlier.
I know they shut him down earlier, and I remember I was reading a few weeks ago that it was about September, October. So because of that process, you're not going to rush a guy back that soon. But it's already about 1.5 to 2 years of development time that he's lost by the time he comes back from Tommy John surgery. So it'll be interesting to see how he responds. It might take him another year or two just to get his form and figure things out. So we'll see what happens from there with Anthony Kay.
Yeah, certainly. What a shame, though. Such a high pick, and to have it, to have that happen to you too. So, well, we will see. As you say, they added some new players. There's a couple of guys that look like they're pretty good. You mentioned a few: Winokur, Brody, Raskin seems to be doing okay so far, hitting a little offensively, and Carlos Sanchez is not hitting the best with the bat, but his catching's been pretty decent so far. What do you feel about that?
I feel like it's improved. I feel like that he's handling the pitching staff a little bit better. Also, he's blocking balls a little bit better. That was a big issue, I think, the first week or two of the season.
Mm-hmm.
He was letting a lot of pass balls by, and that would help advance runners. And then when you have pitchers that are wild and don't have a lot of control, it could put your defense and it could put your pitching staff in a tough spot. But it seems like he studied that. I mean, what you would want from a catcher like him, you probably want his defense to improve and be able to keep improving the game calling skills, and then the offense comes. Always with a catcher, you want to focus on them calling a good game and being able to handle those types of pitchers, and then being able to swing the bat well, and then that's usually secondary. And Sanchez, they'll bring him along like that, but catchers are usually probably the slowest position to develop compared to the other ones in the diamond.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen this before with Tomas Nido, and all of a sudden he found himself offensively a couple of years later when he got to the St. Lucie Mets. So let's hope it could be another case in point with him.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Nido, he was able to really figure things out later. Now he's climbing up these prospect lists. I think I saw an article where people were saying that he might be the best catcher in the Mets system right now. So it's very exciting to see that type of progress. But the catchers just got to be patient. That those times will come. It's like with the Yankees, with Gary Sanchez. Obviously, I'm not trying to compare any of those types of catchers because Sanchez is in a class of his own. But it took him like about 7 or 8 years to figure things out. I think it took him about 5 or 6 years just to get to the Double-A level and really figure it out. So it just takes time with catchers to develop, and you just got to be patient with them at this level.
Yeah. All right. Well, being that you mentioned Sanchez and the Yankees, let's talk a little bit about the Staten Island Yankees. They are off to a very nice start, and as we were talking before we started to record, they were at the same number this year as they were last year, but they look like a very good team. They just had a surprise, not a surprise, but one of the pitchers they just got this past season, Jorge Guzman, who came over from the Houston organization. He had a 10-strikeout game the other day, looked really sharp. Tell us a little bit about him and the rest of the Staten Island Yankees.
Jorge Guzman was actually in the Brian McCann trade. They got Albert Abreu, who was the prize prospect in that deal, and Jorge Guzman was another prospect they got from Houston. And the one thing that really impressed me in the last start that you just mentioned with the 10 strikeouts with Guzman is he didn't walk anybody. And for a guy that throws about 102 miles an hour, it was actually what the radar gun said in TrackMan, that he could get his fastball up. That's pretty impressive because to be able to try to control that type of stuff and have the velocity. And we saw the type of movement that he also had with his secondary stuff. If you remember that he started that game in opening day, seemed like he had flash at the first 2 or 3 innings. He was absolutely dominant against the Brooklyn Cyclones, and then he tired out a little bit, but it was a pretty solid start. And since then, he's had some just terrific outings. He had one the week before, another outstanding one, and he's really looked impressive for them. But it's not just Guzman in that rotation. They could go about 6 or 7 deep with their starting pitching, and I think that's really made probably the biggest difference. You have guys in this rotation. Juan DePaul was a guy that struggled a little bit, but Daniel Alvarez they've had, who's been really impressive. The strikeout to walk ratio has been good with him. They have Drew Finley, who was pitching out of the bullpen last night, because they had Trevor Stephan pitching that game, who was a 3rd-round pick. I'll get to him in a moment, but Drew Finley, it seemed like his poise was back. He was able to locate his pitches, threw about 76 of them. He had a flexor tendon injury last year. Remember, he was the guy that pitched a no-hitter earlier in that year, so he's coming back from that. He's on rehab. It seems like that he's starting to get there. He's only 20 years old, a top 30 prospect, just like Guzman in the system. Doesn't throw nearly as hard, but he's looked good. Alexander Vargas has given them a tremendous lift as well. Their bullpen has been very solid for them. It just seems like it's been really a team effort out of this bullpen and out of the starting rotation. With the exception last night, they gave 5 runs in the 9th inning, which is very surprising, very rare. At one point, this pitching staff for Staten Island had 25 consecutive scoreless innings. That's dating from Sunday's game up until last night's game in the 9th inning. So this is a team that's going to shut you down. They're going to get strikeouts, and the thing is that they throw strikes, so they don't nibble. And when they do throw strikes, they're able to record outs with ease, and when they don't, obviously, they're going to have some longer innings. But I think that's the biggest thing is that they're going to attack hitters. They're not going to nibble around, and they're not going to have long innings. And it's really been a key for them. And that lockdown pitching is the reason why they have the best record in the league right now.
And who did they have anybody coming back from last year's team? I'm perusing the roster, and I noticed some names that look familiar from last year's team. David Palladino and Justin Camplain. Let's see, Timmy Robinson. Are they still with the team, or have they been? Did they start the year and move them up right away?
I mean, most of those guys like Timmy Robinson, Don Thompson, Williams, they were in extended spring training. Dave Palladino, I think this is already his 4th year with Staten Island. So he's been there for a while. They have a lot of familiar names. You know, Justin Camplain was there in 2015. His teammate Jeff Degano was there in 2015 as well. He's coming back. He had some wildness when he was with the Pulaski Yankees. Had a lot of issues getting the ball over the plate. He made his debut a couple of nights ago, pitched the 3rd of an inning, still working his way back. So they have a lot of familiar names. But the one name I also have to mention about that they did have, the one drafted player, I think I referenced him before, was Trevor Stepan. He was from the University of Arkansas, Razorback pitcher. He made his debut last night. He's a 3-pitch pitcher. He throws a fastball, he throws a slider, throws a changeup, and he comes from a slingshot with a slingshot motion. It seemed like he had very good pacing last night. Pitched 2 2/3 scoreless innings, and he's another arm to watch. He also might be on a pitch count, just like we talked about if Peterson's going to be on a pitch count. So the thing is that Staten Island has so many different options and guys they could fit into the bullpen. And as you mentioned, they have a lot of returning guys. And one thing that you noticed this year with the draft, it just seems like that you don't have as many draft picks. You have more guys that have been, returning members of different teams. And that's really what it seems like with Staten Island. Also, 2 other guys I would like to mention that they also have, reference about Don Thompson, Williams, and Timmy Robinson. Dalton Blazer was on the team last year, 7th-round pick. And so he's back with the team. He got off to a hot start, then cooled off a little bit. But the one hitter that's really impressed me as a returning Staten Island Yankee is Kendall Coleman. Kendall Coleman, it seems like he's been a more aggressive hitter. He was actually hitting like well over 400, well over 300. He was hurt the first 2 years of his professional career, a guy that suffered a couple of injuries in his first 2 years in the Gulf Coast League, but now it seems like he's starting to figure things out. He's in his 5th professional season. His plate approach is much better. He's attacking the ball aggressively, and he might be a guy to watch. He was a 13th-round pick in 2013, and probably the most impressive of the returning Staten Island Yankees for that club.
And that's a tough way to start, to get injured like that right off the bat. You're so eager to get your career going, and then to have an injury happen, it's got to stink.
Yeah, I mean, he had some knee problems. I think he only played about 20 to 40 games his first 2 seasons, so he really never had an opportunity to get going. He was a highly touted prospect of a high school variety, being a 13th-round pick, a middle-round guy like that, or I should say 11th-round pick. And then just to have those types of injuries, and then he was striking out once every 3 at-bats. He's starting to get the approach a lot better. And I think it does take time for a high school guy, just like we talked about with catchers, to be able to adjust to that type of approach. And we also figure out the way that pitchers are going to try to pitch you in this league. And it seems like Coleman's getting that. And just this lineup, it seems like they don't have to do too much because of how dominant the pitching is. And they're able, if they score maybe 3-4 runs a game, if they have the pitching that they expect to have, they could win a lot of ball games, and so far that's really been the formula for success for them.
And it's funny though, because some of these guys do get drafted at a young age, and then they seem like by the time they get to the Penn League, it seems like they've been around forever. Some of them you may have heard their name, and it turns out they're like 20 years old, but you hear about them for 3-4 years, and in some instances, so it just get like Wilmer Flores of the Mets. You would think he was about 35, the way he's been around for so long. But of course, they sign a lot of these players at a young age, especially in the Dominican and in those countries, Latin American countries. So it's funny though when you say he's been in the organization for 4 or 5 years and he's like 21 or 20. It's just strange.
It's also strange when you have the international players, 16 years old, they've been in Dominican Summer League, Gulf Coast League, then they go to rookie ball, and then by the time they get a short season, it's also 5 or 6 years, and they're 19 or 20 years old, and
right.
you become impressed with how they're able to grasp the game. So it feels like it's so quickly, but you forget, at 19, 20 years old, they've been in the organization for a few years, and they've worked with the similar coaches, and those guys, that you sign at that age and from a foreign country like that, they're able to develop quickly, and then they're already top 30 prospects, and they really make an impression, and maybe it's somebody that you really don't expect to come up and have that type of season, but they end up doing that, and it really could open some eyes.
Yes, and I have to ask about a Charlotte River dog, and that would be Ben Ruda, who played for Wagner College and played for Staten Island. And last time I looked, he had a pretty good start. Any idea how's he doing now?
Yeah, I mean, he struggled, I think, when he was in Staten Island. I think it was like about a 176 average. But for whatever reason, it seems like that he's figured things out. He's a good kid. It was a late-round draft pick, the 31st rounder. That college produced, I think Andrew Bailey was one of the major league players, but it seems like that he's really started. I think the average has been about, when you look at it for the Charleston River Dogs, he played 43 games going into tonight, 293 average, the 342 on base percentage. It's a lot more patient. Slugging percentage, he's not really a power guy, but he's been able to put the bat on the ball, and he's really figured things out. I think also what happens when you have a guy like Ruda or a guy coming out of college like that, fatigue does set in when you're having your first pro season. You have to adjust to the grind and the travel and those things. And then when you come into a fresh season like that, you have a general idea of what happens and what you need to be able to do in order to succeed. And it seems like that Ruda has been able to do that, and he's a smart kid, and it's good to see that he's able to hit the way he's been able to hit, and hopefully it continues for him.
And maybe the added pressure of playing at where he played a lot of his college games and near home, that could have had something to do with it as well.
I think it also does have an effect, but I think I remember when I talked to him, just the familiarity does help. It's the same dugouts, the same clubhouses, the same locker room, all those different things that he has. I think it was just more that, you're coming off a season where you're coming out of college, and then you sign a pro contract, you're thrusted right into professional baseball. I think he played a couple of games in Pulaski, then he was right into Staten Island. They were in a pennant race. He struggled early. It took him a while to really figure things out. He started to hit a little bit better as the season came to an end, and then the season ends, and then he has a full season here in Charleston. So I think just going through all those different things, going from college, going to the pro ranks, playing in two different pro levels like that, it could take a lot on a player. And it's just good to see that he's able just to adjust and be able to have a season where he's at one place and then hitting the way he is.
Yeah, you always want to see like a local kid, and especially a kid that struggled last year and got drafted low. You'd like to see him make it. Like to see when those low draft picks make it to the big league. So we'll keep our fingers crossed.
I think the low round picks also carry a chip on their shoulder whenever it is, because they feel like either they've been overlooked or that really not many people expect these things out of him. So they have to work twice as hard, because if they do have a rough season, chances are they might get cut, as opposed to maybe a first or second round pick that might get 5 or 6 opportunities just to justify the selection.
So anybody else that we should be looking at on this Staten Island team, and that we should be watching this weekend and for the rest of the season? Any dark horse candidates that you like that are going to surprise everybody?
I wouldn't say that he's a dark horse candidate, but he's really been swinging the bat very well. A guy that really many people haven't really thought of. He had a 4 RBI game last night, had a walk-off hit that helped Staten Island win the game 6-5 last night. His second baseman and shortstop by the name of Oswaldo Cabrera. He's mostly playing second base because they have a shortstop who's the top 30 prospect, Wilkerman Garcia, but Oswaldo Cabrera is already hitting over 300. He's hitting the ball with authority, going the other way. He also has good range at second base. He's a kid that actually was with the Charleston River Dogs this year in the South Atlantic League, but he was only 18 years old, so he struggled there. He only hit about 208, so he's at Staten Island. Seems like he's getting his stroke back. He's a small guy, 5'10", 145 pounds. He was signed a couple of years ago. He's only 18 years old, out of Venezuela. But the confidence, and that's one thing that Julio Mosquera, the manager at Staten Island, mentioned about, is how confident this guy is in the box, that he, every at-bat, he feels like he's going to get a hit and he's going to be able to contribute. And he's really been a really pleasant surprise for them, leading off at the top of the order for Staten Island.
And you mentioned the new manager, Julio Mosquera. Tell us a little bit about him. The Yankees changed their manager in this offseason. Tell us about him.
Yeah, Julio Mosquera actually had 2 separate stints in the major leagues. He played for the Toronto Blue Jays in 1996 and 1997, and then it took him about 8 years to get back to the big leagues. And when he got back to the big leagues, it was with the Milwaukee Brewers. It was the game when Alex Rodriguez hit his 400th home run. he actually makes the final out in that game with Mariano Rivera on the mound. The Brewers were down in that game 12-3, and he gets sent down right after that game because the Brewers brought back Damian Miller. So one thing, when you think about that 8 years between Major League appearances, and the reason I bring that up is I feel like a guy that struggled like that to try to get to the big leagues and be able to have a professional career could relate well, or maybe even better, to young players as opposed to a guy like Alfonso. And it's not a knock on Alfonso, but when you're a star player, I feel like it's always more difficult to try to relate to some players because you always expect them to be at the same talent level that you are. But when you have a guy that struggled to make it to the big leagues, or maybe even didn't make it to the big leagues, sometimes it's easier to relate, because they can understand when there are struggles and also when they have success. So I think that's one thing that's really helped Mosquera relate to some players. He's worked with guys like Gary Sanchez. He's worked also, I think, with Aaron Judge. He's been in the organization in a variety of roles. And he seems like everybody loves playing for him. He has a very good personality, and it's always everything's positive with him. He's worked with Staten Island, I think, as person in 2006 and 2007 seasons. He was part of their staff. He also worked with Francisco Cervelli. He's worked with a lot of players that ended up in the big leagues, and he's really had just a great impact on them. And so far, to start off this season, it's really looked good with him as manager.
Yeah, he seemed to be doing a good job so far. And last year's manager, did they move him up, or did he retire, or what was the deal?
All I know is I don't think he's in the organization anymore. I'm not sure what happened, but with Staten Island, one thing that they do is they move their managers around. It's not like Brooklyn where they'll have a manager in place for about 3 or 4 years. And some organizations are like that. They like to change things up. They like to move guys around. So I think over the last 4 or 5 years, they have had different managers. I think Justin Pope was the last manager that's managed more than a year, and I think that was 2012 and 2013. And he's still in the organization, I believe, as a pitching coach with one of the teams. I think Charleston, he's a pitching coach there. And he's been around on just in the organization, different places. And that's what they like to do. And, Mosquera's getting the opportunity now in Staten Island. This is his chance.
And any word on, of course, there's a lot of construction going around the ballpark. How is that all working out for them this year? Because they're just, again, they have a good team and they don't seem to draw. And part of the problem is that big wheel that they've got the construction going on. Have you had any problems around there so far this season?
Well, the biggest difference is that the entrance that's closest from the ferry terminal to the ballpark is actually closed because of construction. They have a cafe around there. What they want to do is on one side of the ballpark, they're putting a shopping mall. On the other side of the ballpark, they're building that Ferris wheel, as you referenced. And it's taken a long time to be able to try to build both those things. They've had issues with parking over the last couple of years. It's been very difficult for fans to be able to go out there. They're trying to make every effort possible with various promotions and doing what they can and try to get fans and try to generate interest. It's just been an uphill battle with everything that they've dealt with these constructions and with everything taking as long as it has, that they've been having so much difficulty drawing fans. But, hopefully things change because it's just been rough for them.
Yeah, it's a shame, really. It's a nice ballpark, and to have that sort of problem. Now, last year it wasn't too bad. They had the valet parking, and they would shuttle you over to the ballpark from the parking area there, and that actually worked out pretty good, and I'm surprised. But I heard this year that they may have done away with that, or the Yankees made an area available. I wasn't sure what I read, and I was wondering, did you know anything about that at all?
I heard they opened up, I think, like some parking area, but I think that's one thing that they did do with that. But there's just very limited room where you can try to park and try to figure things out. And I think there's only like 1 or 2 gates that you can actually go if you're taking the ferry from the ballpark. So it's a bit of a walk when you walk out from one of the gates, and it's near the bus terminal. So I guess somebody could take the bus and go 1 block towards the stadium. But if you're walking there, it's a 10-minute walk, and if somebody has disabilities or has difficulty walking, it's going to be very hard for them, and that might discourage somebody from going to the ballpark. They're going to have to figure out how to work around those constraints. That's stuff that's pretty much beyond their control, but it does eat into their attendance. And they've just had so many issues over the last, I would say, 5 years drawing fans that, hopefully that things change maybe when they do get some of the tourism and some of those things. But I think one of the things that also hurts when you draw fans in that area is that because of where the ballpark's located, it's located on the tip of Staten Island, so it's trying to cater a lot to fans that are from Manhattan, from Queens, from Brooklyn, from the Bronx, all areas that are not Staten Island.
Right.
And within Staten Island itself, you mostly have buses for public transportation. People pretty much drive when they go there.
Right.
So if you have limited parking space, they're not going to go, and they're going to feel like they're excluded, and maybe it's not worth making the effort to go. So I think that also hurts them a little bit. But, maybe once the construction finally ends, it's taken with so many delays, and maybe then they could start drawing some fans and really implementing the plan that they want to implement.
Well, let's hope so. As it is, as I said, it's a nice ballpark. Got a great view of Manhattan from the ballpark, and we like to have different competition. It's really great, and the job that Brian Cashman's doing, not only rebuilding the major league team, but also the entire minor league system. They must have some great scouts, because they're certainly putting through some good prospects right now.
Every day it seems like a new prospect is coming out of the minor league system with just more to come. I mean, last week, obviously Dustin Fowler got hurt, but they had him up here. Clint Frazier came up here. You had Miguel Andujar come up. You had Tyler Wade. The list of names just goes on and on. Mike Ford is having an incredible season. He just got promoted to AAA. Just the way that Cashman and the organization has been able to try to rebuild and find these different players. This year they drafted 28 pitchers out of the 40 picks, so really there's an emphasis on trying to find pitchers. And, you also, the guys that they ended up getting when they made the Andrew Miller trade, Justice Sheffield, I mentioned about Clint Frazier in that deal. They were able to get Dylan Cade and get Nick Green in the deal for Carlos Beltran. They were able to get in the Aroldis Chapman trade, obviously, before he got hurt. They had Gleyber Torres and Billy McKinney, who was a top prospect in the first-round pick a couple of years back. So Brian Cashman has done a remarkable job. Damon Oppenheimer, the entire scouting department, and Gary Denbo since taking over the minor league system for the Yankees. And you mentioned about Staten Island. Maybe that's also another incentive for guys to want to, or maybe for fans to come to the ballpark. One thing that they haven't been able to do is really have those types of prospects and guys that come out of the system that maybe played in Staten Island and then end up playing in the big leagues. But now when you have Sanchez and you have Dylan Betances and you have some of the other names like Tyler Wade I mentioned about that come out of Staten Island and had some impact there, now playing in the big leagues, that might be an incentive to go out to Staten Island, because now you're seeing some future Yankees play.
Sure, it's no different in Brooklyn. I mean, when Conforto was there, it was a thrill to go out and see Conforto. Last year, Justin Dunn and some of the other guys, Woodmansey and Alonso. So it's got to help to have some big name prospects there.
I think it does, because I know when I cover around the league and you see like different guys, the impacts that they have. It really wasn't like that with the Yankees for a number of years. You didn't have a guy like Andrew Benintendi come in there, for 2 years, be able to just go through the minor league system and get to the major leagues and have the impact that he's having. Mm-hmm. The Yankees never really had that. They expected guys like John Ford Griffin, Eric Duncan, and some other names to make that type of impact. They had some great seasons in Staten Island, and then they stalled when they got to the Eastern League or when they got to AAA, or they ended up becoming trade chips. And so those guys never really had the chance to establish themselves. So when you have some of the prospects come out of the Yankee system and be able to do some things and then have their career start out in Staten Island and then get to the major leagues just years, and there's a couple of years after they were in Staten Island and in close proximity to where the Yankees play, that's obviously a thrill for them, and also obviously a thrill for the fans that got to see where their careers began and the point that they got now that they're playing in the big leagues.
And yeah, and it's a fascinating thing to even try to figure out who's going to make it and who's not going to make it. That's something that's it's a crapshoot in the sport of baseball, more so than some of the other sports, because they do have colleges. They get an idea of the development of a player, but baseball, a lot of times, even with some of the college players, it's hard. But it's almost, it's really a crapshoot with a high school player.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's 13.9% of drafted players end up playing in the major leagues. Only 13.9%. That's just to get to the major leagues. I mean, think about guys making all-star teams or getting to the Hall of Fame or having significant impacts on their team. Obviously, that number's a lot less. 69% of them out of the first round end up making it. And when you're a high school player out of the first round, there's so many high expectations. I don't know if you noticed this, Gary. It seems like this year there's a lot more of these high-touted high school players that are playing in the New York Penn League. Maybe it's because guys are signing late or just the nature of the league has changed, but I never seen that before. Jay Groom, I know he was coming off an injury, but when you think of a guy like Matt Manning or Brendan Hanafy or Austin Franklin, these are all guys that are top 30 pitching prospects.
Right.
They're out of high school. They pitched to play in the Gulf Coast League, but they're playing in the New York Penn League. Do you remember ever seeing something like that, or does it seem like maybe it's like a new trend that you're seeing from these highly touted high school pitchers playing in this league?
Yeah, I don't recall it, so maybe it is a new trend. Maybe they're putting some of these guys on a fast track and to get them to the majors quicker. Who knows? If they can handle it, there's no problem with it.
Yeah, it seems like those guys have been able to handle that, and also the Cyclones ran into Austin Franklin. They ran into Matt Manning, so that's also kind of tough when you have an inexperienced lineup and you're going up against highly touted high school pitchers that were drafted within the first 5 rounds and are already moving through the ranks and are the prize pitchers and the prize players for the organization. That's also going to be very difficult for that type of lineup to handle, and especially when you don't have any college players in your lineup at that time.
And I know you haven't seen a lot of the other teams in the New York Penn League yet. They all haven't been around, of course. But what other teams that you've seen so far has impressed you?
I think the Hudson Valley Renegades. I mentioned about Austin Franklin. We saw him pitch about a week ago against Brooklyn, and he had 6 walks, but he looks strong. He has a good approach out there. He has quality makeup, and the guys in that lineup like Zach Law and Matt Dacey, they're not big names, but they have good approaches at the plate. They know what to do. They're not trying to hit the ball over the fence. And they've been winning some games lately. Actually they've had a losing streak, but early in the year they're winning some games. It's a 6-game losing streak now, but if they get the pitching, they can make an impact. Aberdeen Ironbirds, I think they've won about 6 or 7 games in a row.
Yeah, 7.
So Staten Island has not been able to really create any type of separation. So those are the 2 teams in the McNamara division that have really been able to try to make a run, and maybe they could do something this year, and we'll see what happens.
Well, yeah, we'll see what happens with them, and it should be an exciting year as we get deeper into it. And I want to thank you for coming on tonight, and tell the folks where they can read your work.
You can read my work at PinstripeProspects.com, where I cover Yankee prospects, and AmazinProspects.com, where I cover Mets prospects. R&P Sports Media is where I cover prospects around the New York Penn League, and that's where you can find me. You can also reach me on Twitter at Gershon.
And